With the local steel industry still hanging by a thread and failing to make profits, analysts say it might be on its way to becoming irrelevant to the economy. Some are calling for import duties on steel, but others say they may need to turn things around, and this may be just a temporary solution. But in studio with me to discuss the outlook for the local steel industry is Finweek editor Jana Marais. Jana, thank you so much for joining me. So looking at the steel industry, we are down about 30% since 2007. That's quite substantial. What are the pressure points here?
Yes, hi to me. I think there's very little good news in the steel industry at this point, and like so many other things, the big story is again China. I think China's production has increased phenomenally in steel. I think over the same period, up nearly 70%. And I think the big shift is taking place in China that, moving from investment-led to consumer-led economy means they're sitting with all this excess steel that they need to sell in global markets. So we are by no means the only country that's feeling the effect of this. But then there's also local factors that has been hurting us, and those things, electricity, labor costs, you name it. I think, some of these factors is kind of out of the control of the steel industry themselves, but there's also been massive underinvestment, I think, in local technologies, in research and development. So there's some blame that needs to go to the companies themselves as well.
Jana, we've seen some dialogue that's taking place of government, the mining companies themselves, that trying to ensure that we don't see job cuts and finding a way forward here. Will this work?
Look, I'm a bit skeptical personally. I think we saw this morning DTI announced that they've approved 10% import duties on some of the steel grades of steel. I think it might be too little too late. And if you can't compete with the rand sitting where it's sitting, that already offers some protection against imports. That, I don't know if an extra 10% is really going to help you. And also it comes with quite strict conditions. They can't cut any jobs on those production lines. They have to make quite substantial investments in the next 3 years. And if you look at companies like Highveld Steel and how they've been really struggling over the last 5 years, you wonder why companies haven't asked for this protection much sooner. And I also think, it's, again, they're going to need to invest in improving the productivity and efficiencies, and I don't know if they have the cash to do that at this point.
Jana, let's just look at what other economies or other countries are doing in terms to protect particular industries, or what are some of the best practices that we're seeing around the world?
Yeah. I think import duties obviously have been a big thing. You look at a country like Turkey, for example, they're quite big steel producers themselves. They have import duties of up to 40% on primary steel products. And again, you can understand that it just gives that little bit of breathing room to their local producers to have space to compete in their own domestic market. I think the other thing is stimulating local demand, and China is the prime example of how that can work. And we haven't seen much of that here. For many reasons, the steel industry is not the favorite of government, and which means that they haven't gotten preference when it comes to big state tenders and so on. So also to just stimulate local demand and make sure that we actually use our own steel when we build things like Medupi and Kusile and so on. But really those are the main issues. And then of course giving funding at preferential rates. So I think we saw IDC saying they're giving quite a bit of money to Highveld Steel to try and get them out of business rescue. So we will need to see a lot more of that happening.
Jana, just to round off, looking at the mining industry as a whole, you mentioned factors like China, electricity constraints. We have seen a lot of the mining companies coming out with their numbers. I mean, what has been the general consensus on the ground with this particular industry?
Look, I think we're in for extremely tough times. And it's really going to be the guys who can get their cost bases under control. So if you're a low-cost producer, you definitely have more room to breathe. So I think we'll see a lot more job cuts. I think we'll see a lot more production cuts. So overall, I think we're in for a very, very tough time.
Jana, thanks so much for that. That was Jana Marais, of course. She's the editor of Finweek.